Not sure how to measure your internal communications? Prove the worth of your internal communication strategy with Contact Monkey's email solution built into Outlook and Gmail. With Contact Monkey, you will be able to track and analyze employee engagement from your inbox. Start measuring email opens, link clicks, location tracking, and various forms of employee feedback, such as Employee Net Promoter Score. To try Contact Monkey's free demo, visit www.contactmonkey.com/ICPro. I'm Sarah Jackson. Welcome to Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. This season, we're closing the gap. I've tracked down the experts that can help us as internal communicators close the gap from where we are now to where we need to be. We're connecting the dots to drive value and lead from the inside out.
So one of the things that we really try not to do is to measure the amount of deliverables or the tactics. So that's the first thing is, understanding truly what our objective is.
From Storyteller to Data Geek, that's Greg Bardsley, Director of Internal Communications at Equinix, the world's top data center interconnection company with nearly 10,000 employees. Now, Greg oversees a small internal comms department that, by the way, was awarded Lean Team of the Year. Many internal comms teams are lean, and in this series, Greg shares how his lean team, through measurement, is able to get off the internal comms hamster wheel, scrambling to every request, to working on things that drive employee behavior. This and much more on today's show.
I'm Greg Bardsley, and I'm Director of Internal Communications at Equinix.
Greg, I am so excited to have you on the show. I know we got connected probably a couple years now at one of our live events that we did. And back then you were talking about measurement. I know our listeners sometimes feel overwhelmed by measurement because we go into this field because we love words and we love to tell creative stories. And so sometimes numbers might not be our thing. But before we dive in to get into the weeds on measurement, tell me a little bit about your company.
Equinix is the world's top data center and interconnection company. And what that means is we have nearly 10,000 customers connecting with each other in more than 200 data centers around the world. We've been around for more than 20 years, and we have close to 10,000 employees.
How many people are on your team, and how's your internal comms team structured?
So our internal comms team at Equinix is pretty tight. We have a total of 4 people who are responsible for driving the global all Equinix internal communications program. That said, there are dozens of other people whose their daily jobs include internal communications to one degree or another. So there are a lot of folks who touch internal communications, and in some cases there are communicators who aren't organized under the corporate function who spend almost all their time on internal communications.
Well, and you were, I think, in 2018 awarded the Lean Team of the Year. So it's another reason why I wanted to talk to you about your team. Before we get to your team, though, I want to talk about you. Tell me a little bit about your personal backstory and how landed at this adventure at Equinix. Give us a little bit of your journey in the internal comms space.
Sure. Yeah, I was, I'd say that the one common denominator with my career has been storytelling. One way or another, it's been about telling a story. I began my career thinking I was going to be a newspaper journalist, for 30 years plus. And I did start off as a newspaper reporter and did that for about 5 years, but then got hooked on to technology. I live in the Silicon Valley, and all these amazing things were happening around me in terms of technology and how technology was changing the world. So I did make a transition out of newspapers, and along the way, I've worked as a ghostwriter and then became a speechwriter at Sun Microsystems, and did a lot of executive communications, and then got into internal communications there. And at HP, I was both internal and executive communications, and now been at Equinix for the past 6 years.
I know that when we were prepping for the podcast, we were talking about, this time in history we find ourselves in, being in the midst of a global pandemic, and measurement. And you had said something that struck me and stuck with me, that because you have been measuring, it sort of changed and enhance this dynamic of the role that you felt like you were playing in Equinix. Let's start there with what measurement did for you, and how you were seen during that time.
Yeah, I'm spending, most of my time still working on pandemic related work or just topics. So the pandemic is obviously not over. I think it's still consuming quite a bit of my time. I feel that some of the measurement systems that we had in place, and the work that we had done around measurement and looking at um, practices that were most impactful, really did help us in terms of being able to respond to the pandemic initially, and then support employees now.
So let's talk about becoming a data geek. So, because I think that that's the pro part of, internal comms pro. And to your point, people go in, I think a lot of us go into internal comms because we are writers at heart. So if the world today is really, I think, requiring the internal communicator to become a data geek, what's the first thing that I should be asking myself, before I start measuring? Like, where do I start if I want to go down the road? And how do I become geeked out about the numbers? Because sometimes, if I'm being completely honest, I'm scared maybe of what the numbers might tell me, or of what I might not know. So, what's my first step in embarking on really developing a good measurement strategy?
I love how you just said how you're scared, or how they can be quote unquote scary. I think it's interesting you say that, 'cause I think sometimes numbers, can be a little scary for a communicator, just in terms of, how people are getting themselves set up, in terms of needing to report on a set of numbers. And once you establish a set of numbers, oftentimes it's very easy, it's natural to kind of go back and kind of track where you are against the numbers. And one of the things, to answer your question, I mean, one of the things that we know that I think is very easy to get, when people come to us, when stakeholders come to us for help, um, it's very easy to go straight to the tactic, or the deliverable, whatever it might be, whether it's an article on your intranet site, or how many events you hold. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when people start looking at those numbers, it's a little scary, just because people know now, you're going to need to maintain that, or there's an expectation to maintain a number, even though the number might be focused on a deliverable or a tactic. And so, one of the things that we really try not to do is to measure the amount of deliverables or the tactics. What we really try to start with, and a lot of times we just, even after all this time in internal communications, we need to stop ourselves. And when we're talking with a stakeholder, or we're looking at a situation, and ask ourselves or ask our stakeholders, and begin that conversation about what is our objective.
I think that's so good, to make sure that the first step is overcoming the default to just go right to I think that's such a great tip, is to stop. And I think that also helps us, again, evolve and transforms as leaders, so that we're not just, okay, yeah, I'll write that article for you, to really almost stop and push back on the leader to say, all right, time out. What is it that you're wanting to do? And that they're looking to us to help them really think through it, because they might not have really thought through even their own objective, which seems crazy, but I think that's such a great tip. So let's keep going. With this. So I start with that, overcome that default of not going to the tactic, and this action framework. So is that kind of, that's your Equinix's high level framework with how you guys have gone about developing uh your strategy?
Yes. The great thing about the knowledge, attitude, action framework is what we have learned over the years by measuring audience outcomes along those three pillars is there are different vehicles that serve each each pillar more effectively. So, for instance, we have a company meeting. What we really found through just measuring the audience and looking at what we do there and how that impacts the audience is that it certainly you can teach someone something at the company meeting. And certainly there is like this knowledge opportunity. Um, and you might be able to influence people to kind of maybe change behavior, but where it really is most effective is around attitude and how you feel. Do you want it when we want to use the company meeting, for instance, so people can feel connected and not only certainly they understand what's going on and they get updates, but we want them to come out of there feeling like I'm working at the best place possible, which they are actually. Equinix is an amazing company. The intranet, for instance, we have found um, we can we really invest a lot in our storytelling and we do want people to feel connected, and that is one of the things that the intranet, we call it the hub, is really powerful in. But the other thing that it's super powerful in is just knowledge and people learning. People have a little more time to give when they're reading versus when they're listening to something. um, we found with the company meeting, for instance, during our replays, really people prefer, like, we divide it into a magazine format, and really like the sweet length, the sweet spot on a segment is like around 9 to 10 minutes. When it gets over that, we can see that people, there is a chunk of folks that drop off. However, with the hub, there's more opportunity for people to invest more time. They do, and that's a better vehicle when it really comes to someone really understanding something. We have something called the Simple Equinix series, and it's a series of stories that basically makes Equinix simple for employees. And they're involved. They're simple, but they're not. These stories are not brief, and they're just wildly successful, and people really love reading them because they've kind of made that choice to go in there and learn a little more. With behavior, we've seen that manager communications really has an impact in terms of like actually changing action.
Okay, you're a proven storyteller, but maybe you're ready to dabble a bit more in data. With Circle Broadcast cross channel analytics, finding out important info like what content employees like or where they're consuming their internal comms is available. With click metrics and more, create custom dashboards to track your department and organizational goals and easily share it with your stakeholders. Broadcast Insights tracks data that shows the actual value of your efforts. You can visit circle.com/insights to learn more about the Broadcast Internal Comm solution. That's CERKL.com/insights. Okay, friends, so I want to stop here and recap. Greg is helping us connect the dots on some things that I don't want you to miss. So number one, he starts with identifying the objective. Notice he doesn't just go straight to saying yes and start delivering tactics. Number two, he and his team have come up with their own framework, the Attitude Action Framework. And this has given his team alignment in his measurement methodology. I love this idea of coming up with your own framework. Okay, all of this, as you know, is going in our resource guide that you can download for free at internalcommspro.com/show notes. Now, you're going to get geeked out in this next part as Greg shares his money question that outlines his team's number one objective and how he uses data to influence his manager's behavior. So I want to give into the weeds on some of this because for you, this season is all about closing the gap for the listeners, kind of where they are and where they need to be. And when you say things like, we figured out that 9 to 10 minutes is the sweet spot, can you dive a little bit more into the weeds on how long did you measure that to get there? Like, how did you actually get from being able to say, I know these vehicles, I know it's 9 to 10 minutes here, I know it's manager comms for here, because it feels like there's a big story and journey and perhaps failures and messiness within the here to there. And I want to get into that. Like, how did you know that it was 9 to 10 minutes? How long did that take you to figure that out?
It's taken us some time to figure that out. I mean, I think technically we were able to use the measurement system for our webcasting technology that we were using at the time, and we have moved to a different webcasting technology. But we literally went in and took a look at, with these replays that we were sending out, like, and I was saying, we deliver them in a magazine format where people can click and choose what they want to listen to. So as opposed to listening to the entire company meeting from beginning to end, which is also an option. And there's a ton of people who will just click on that and they will listen to the whole thing from beginning to end, as a replay. But people are just so overloaded with responsibilities and things they need to do, and so there's a lot of folks who will choose. And so the first thing we were just looking at is, on our magazine delivery vehicle, what were people clicking on? And so that, number one, tells you, it gave us a lot of insight on what people, at the end of the day, what they're interested in. And one of the things I think this is an audience, this is a universal truth for all audiences, which is, people say, I just want the facts. I just want, not everybody, but there's a good number of people who are saying, just tell us, what we need to know. But really, at the end of the day, people are interested in people. And the more we can tell our story through people with stories, I think the more effective we are. So number one, we saw that regardless of what people might be writing in the writing comments, um, the numbers speak for themselves, and that there's a lot of interest in some of the human aspects of stories. So we really try to get the business into very human stories. And the other thing, to answer your question, we just literally looked at how long were people staying on these replays, and we noticed that when a segment kind of went beyond 10 minutes or so, there was a significant drop off. So, I think sometimes, and it's really challenging to keep segments, under 10 minutes, but it was also really powerful to be able to, when we're meeting with stakeholders and we're talking with guests for the company meeting and we're trying to dope it all out, you could literally come back to your stakeholders with authority and just say, yeah, I know that, there's a lot that we want to get through here. And right now we're looking at, this is like a 15-minute segment, but I've got to let you know that this, most people are gonna drop off by the time you get to the 15-minute mark.
Hmm.
And so no stakeholder, everybody wants to deliver something that's really going to, connect with employees and reach them. So it's given us a tremendous amount of, I guess, authority or influence with our stakeholders.
So let's get into, you said you're watching how many minutes they fall off. Let's dive in a little bit deeper to some of these other things. So when you are doing, say, what are some other things that you measure? So for example, how do you measure like the performance of a campaign or an email campaign? Tell me about that.
One of the key campaigns that we initiated a couple years ago was just helping what we consider probably our most effective and powerful internal communicators, and that is our people manager community. Our people managers are some of our most important communicators, and I would maybe even argue our most important communicators. What we realized is that there was a great need to be able to help our people managers communicate and tell the company story with their teams. And so what we started with was, again, looking at what was our objective, and our number one objective with Equinix internal communications. You think about all the different things that we must work on. We talked about COVID-19 and the pandemic. Who would have guessed that back in November and December, when all of us were working on our plans and our objectives and goals for 2020, right? And then the world changes, and we must be agile and adjust to that. So our number one objective is, can our employees tell the Equinix story? And we've been tracking that as long as I've been here for the last 6 years, and looking at what are the employee behaviors that seem to move the needle when it comes to their ability to tell the Equinix story. And so we looked at everything in terms of measuring employees and demographics, where they work, how long they've been at Equinix, are they a people manager or not, how often do they hear from their manager, what vehicles do they use or not use. And by doing that, we were able to triangulate around some behaviors and some things that we were doing that were moving the needle, and we've continued to invest in that. One of the things we saw at the beginning was employees who have really engaged managers, no surprise there, right? But managers who actually take the time and deliver company overview information and meet with them to talk about the strategy of the company and our direction. Those employees were just so far more engaged. It was just crazy. Not only their ability to tell the story, but also their confidence in the direction of the business. And so manager comms is one thing that we've just continued to invest in. We also just measured not only like what managers were doing, like how many downloads of our quarterly presentation that we provide managers throughout the year, and people want to know, well, how many downloads do you have? But what we looked at also were employees, and we asked employees, and it was anonymous, but we asked them, how often is your manager presenting this overview presentation? They should be doing it every 3 months. So we don't know, which managers are pitching or not pitching, and we don't want to, get to that level of granularity or invade people's, privacy, or create a sense of people being monitored. But we wanted to look at kind of the mass audience behaviors, and employees who said that their managers were presenting this information on a regular basis were double-digit more engaged. Which was really powerful to us, right? Because it kind of allowed us to get out of like, well, how many downloads do you have? Whether a manager downloads the presentation or not, but what's happening to employees who have engaged managers. And not knowing who those managers are, who those employees are, we could see a double-digit difference in terms of their engagement, which was just super powerful. And then just allowed us to go back to our stakeholders and our leaders and to show them, look at the difference that manager communications make, right? If we can get managers to invest some time to pitch this quarterly presentation, their teams are going to be double-digit more engaged versus those with managers who don't. And so that was super powerful.
That's fascinating. When you are looking at the data, do you set a certain time every week or every month, or is this just now part of your flow, or is it, do you find that it's helpful to say, all right, this is kind of day to day where we're gonna comb through this from a workflow standpoint?
Yeah. Well, we do a twice a year internal communications survey, and we're thankful that we have so many employees who actually do respond to that, because we do want to create, sometimes when we start a new initiative, we want to create a baseline. And so that is number one, and that's where we're really tracking audience, objectives, and obviously, like we were saying earlier, you kind of identify the vehicles, the behaviors, um, the correlations between what we want to achieve and what's happening. And then when it comes to literally delivering, the tactics or delivering on what we need to do, we are tracking things like downloads, of course, right? If the download numbers were really low, or if an attendance for something was really low, we need to know that, because we don't want to do anything that's not effective. But at the end of the day, what we really are tracked on, and literally our KPIs, Sarah, are all on audience outcomes. There's not one KPI that we have in there about how many stories we deliver, or how many quarterly meetings we deliver, or how many emails are sent out. This all goes back to the audience, and can employees tell the Equinix story, for instance. um, how confident are they in the future of the business, or what is their level of confidence in the direction of the company.
Interesting. I think that is an interesting point, is to make sure that you're measuring the right thing, because are you saying leadership doesn't care about how many stories were delivered? They want how did it affect more of the bottom line, or these important outcomes of the behavior change of the audience?
Yeah. um, so sure, we measure how many people are viewing a story, and how many downloads we have, and how many people are attending the company meeting. But at the end of the day, our KPIs, our most important KPIs, center around audience outcomes. And for instance, our number one goal, or what we call our money question, for internal comms at Equinix, is, can you tell the Equinix story? What percentage of employees can tell the Equinix story? We can tell the Equinix story, and we have increased that from, I think, the low 40s percent range in 2014 into the mid 80% range now. And it's all just by triangulating on those behaviors, those employee behaviors and the vehicles that have made the difference. And so we really make an effort to track those outcomes, the audience outcomes, and that really is what we goal ourselves on. And so we do that twice a year, where we at the beginning of the year we create a baseline, or and there are some questions that we've been tracking for 6 years, and then toward the end of the year, or 6 months later, we track it again. And so we're very lucky that our employees continue to participate on those, but that really helps us understand where employees are. And then separately, we do look at, depending on what the vehicle is, we do look at, what the activity is, how people are consuming that vehicle. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's like monthly, we're looking at that, sometimes weekly, it really depends. And sometimes quarterly, and it really depends on, the specific vehicle. Like, for instance, our manager communication program is every 3 months, essentially. We do a call with our CEO for all people managers, and that really came out of the success of our quarterly um, update presentation for managers to provide to their teams. And so now we have coupled that with a call that our CEO has with people managers, so they're better prepared to be able to pitch that quarterly update with their teams. And so we're obviously checking, it's more on a quarterly basis in terms of our manager communications. With the intranet, obviously, we're tracking that weekly, and for other vehicles, it depends on what the cadence is for reporting that some of our stakeholders might have.
Okay, that's interesting. So that different and you're using the word vehicle. That's the same thing as like the channel, right? So internet events, it depending on the cadence that you're on determines how often you're looking at those measurement indications.
That's right. That's right. And then and then obviously, I think everybody can identify with this. I mean, it really also depends on, sometimes our stakeholders, or our our leadership, we have our own measurement system, or they have their own measurement system that we need to fold into. And so I think oftentimes it depends on, where your goal is. Is it in a monthly dashboard, a quarterly dashboard? Is it something you report out twice a year? And that, it varies depending on, kind of the program and, like you said, the vehicle that we use.
Okay, friends, all of this amazing information can be accessed on our resource guide for this episode at internalcommspro.com/show notes. Now, next week, we'll continue our conversation with Greg, and it's something you're not going to want to miss because Greg dives into the layers of his measurement strategy and how it has framed an empowering narrative to leadership. And the most important part of our conversation gets revealed as he shares a failure that got his team off the internal comms hamster wheel. Stay with us as our journey to closing the gap on measurement continues next week.
Internal Comms Pro podcast is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our theme music is Big Vision by Purple Planet Music. Don't forget to visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes for our free resource guides. Thank you for listening.